it's the relationship conversation that nobody is having, but everybody should. And so in this conversation is where I go into a little bit more and explore sexuality as part of whole person health. Because having these conversations allows us to create a safer container for ourselves and for each other, which is absolutely linked to how we could become healthier as mental health and physical health as well.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Queer Relationships, Queer Joy. This is Keely C. Helmick, one of your hosts.
And your other host, Melissa DeSegurant.
And we are super excited to have a guest today. We get to talk to a sex positive doctor, which, like, how many do we know of those? Very few. So we are very lucky to have that in our state of Oregon and doing some rad things. But before, like, Eveline, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Eveline Molina Decker, and I am a board certified family physician who's practicing, primary care in Salem, Oregon. I'm sex positive, which means that seeing sexuality as a really important healing modality in all of our health. So I see sexuality as not something separate from whole health. It's part of our whole health. And integrating that and teaching communication and a lot of the tenets of what we learn in sex positivity is really the basis of most of my work.
Yeah, it's so great. Eveline, do you have pronouns that you want us to use?
Her is works for me. I am a Mexican American Jewish raised. I was raised Catholic, but and in the Mexican tradition. But I'm Mexican American and also Jewish, and I that's basically I identify as queer, non-monogamous, polyamorous, open about all of that in my life because I believe that if we could start owning our identities and showing that we are just like everybody else, that's an important way of changing the world and changing people and seeing who we are.
Yay, thank you. Yeah, and I kind of jumped the gun and did something a little differently than normal because Melissa, I didn't have you introduce yourself and I didn't introduce myself yet, but that's okay because we
The
can
listeners know us, but we can still do introduction.
every time, all the time.
Yep. Well, I'm Melissa. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns, preferably interchangeably. That feels really good. I identify as gender queer and gender fluid. I'm a bisexual person, also polyamorous, practicing non-monogamy, and a therapist at Connective Therapy Collective.
And my name is Keely C. Helmick. I am a licensed professional counselor, queer sex therapist. I am queer, gender fluid, non-conforming, non-binary femme. I am solo currently practicing dating non-monogamously. And I don't know, I always miss something, but that's okay.
You're the owner of Connective Therapy Collective.
I am the owner. I am the owner. So, Eveline, one of the things we've been talking, well, Melissa, is there anything you want to say before we jump into or are we going to save it for Queer Joy?
I just want to say that based on the introduction, I'm already really excited, especially about this. Like, yes, sexuality is like just part of our whole thing. It doesn't have to be this separate friend. The words like alternative lifestyle have been thrown around a lot with non-monogamy, and I'm kind of just sick of it. So I'm already happy.
So, in this idea of this integration of both relationship styles, being a human in this world of queerness and non-monogamy, do you want to tell all of our listeners a little bit about how you got to this place in your life? Because you're in this really yummy place and you have all this life experience.
Yes, I do. I'm starting to own that. It's like, yes, I am in my crone years, and that means I have a lot of things to talk about, and it's a beautiful thing. Yeah, so I pretty much got into sex positive spaces about 7 or 8 years ago. Before that, I have been I was married for 22 years in a heteronormative, monogamous marriage. And in my 40s, I think during the time where a lot of people start to really question, like, who am I? Am I doing what I want to be doing here on earth? Is this really who I am? Some questioning our identity, especially as, if we have any offspring or children that we're raising, they probably get a little older by then. So it's like you finally have that breathing space. And during that breathing space, the first thing I did was join a roller derby team. And
Oh, yes.
Fantastic.
yeah, I joined a roller derby team, and that was like, wow, this is amazing being in this group of all femme space where we get to dress up and take on alter identities. And for the first time in like 20 years of my life, I was able to take a breath and really reevaluate who am I and what is it that I want to be. During that time, I was also deep in the study of integrated medicine. I've always been studying integrated medicine ever since I
Yeah.
graduated from medical school and way back in the 90s. But I was getting a certification in functional medicine, which is looking at the basis of underlying disease and dysfunction.
Mm.
And while I was doing this study, and it took me about 5 years of going away and doing courses and studying, like right as I finished, I was at a conference and I was looking at all the books on the table and I realized there's not one book about sexuality. And this
Wow.
was happening kind of like during my 40s, reawakening of my sexuality. And I thought there's not one person speaking about this.
Uh-huh.
And that is a real, like, how can we really talk about holistic integrative medicine when we're not talking about this really important thing that I know I'm going through? I
Yeah.
see all of my patients who are older and going through menopause kind of just being like, yeah, I got through menopause. I don't have any sex drive and that's okay for me. And I was like, wait, I feel like I never even owned my sexuality. I'm not ready to give it away, give it up. And how can that be a healthy thing? So
Yeah.
at that point, I dove into trying to learn more about sexuality. And where does one learn about sexuality? Well, a sex shop. That's my first university and continuing medical education was at Shebop.
Uh-huh.
Shebop really, their offerings were so broad that I didn't feel. In fact, I remember the first time I walked into Shebop. It used to be a clothing store, so I just walked in there thinking it was a clothing store, and I remember walking in for the first time and being like, "This is not a clothing store." And
Clothing store.
I do have to understand, like, why. I think maybe once in my 20s in medical school, a girlfriend and I drove by an adult shop once and we're like, let's go in and take a look at what it looks like. And we went in really nervous, and we like walked out really fast. And that was like my only experience with that sort of shop. So I walked into Shebop. I remember being like, in my earlier 40s and being, okay, this is no longer a clothing store. And instead of running out the door, let me take a breath and look around. And it was like this woman owned store. And I was like really impressed, still quite uncomfortable, but impressed by it. So I got on their mailing list and knew that they were teaching classes. So the first thing I did was I always remember my very first class was like on blowjobs. And I took that class 5 times.
Yes. Wow.
There's a lot to learn.
Yeah, especially when you come from a Catholic Mexican background. It was just a really uncomfortable, it was an uncomfortable place for me. And it was in one of these workshops, it wasn't that one, but it was one of these workshops where they talked about that safer sex. It was Rima Halka's safer sex elevator speech, which was
Uh-huh.
like 19 questions you're supposed to get done within 5 minutes on the elevator. And I was like, it kind of, the concept blew my mind because it's a concept that I never had even heard of. And
Uh-huh.
so I went back to my office and I started trying to teach my patients this concept.
Uh-huh.
And so that was concept number one that I learned from sex positive space, from sexuality, that I integrated into like my normal practice. Then a little after that, in my explorations, I went into kink spaces to explore that. I went into, I went to a swingers club to experience that. And then I joined I joined a sex positive organization in Portland at the time that was quite strong and had really good offerings. And that's where I got exposed to boundaries, which honestly, like never. Here I was probably like 46, 47,
Uh-huh.
never knew boundaries. So like the boundaries class, I was like, wow, this is so interesting. And then I got exposed to tantra spaces, and little by little, I realized that one of the things that was really common in all of these spaces was communication.
Yeah. We say it
Right?
all the
I mean,
time.
and communicating like really basic things like your sexual health and your STI status, what it is you desire, what it is, what your boundaries are, and what you need to be able, and your identity, who are you? And whereas I started really incorporating a lot of this in my medical practice, what I did do was I took all these concepts and I created a framework for a talk that is what a lot of my work is right now around, is about bringing the sex positive talk to the mainstream. And I call it the sex talk nobody is having, but everybody should.
Mm.
And it's called STARS, and that's an acronym. So I know there's a lot of different acronyms. I could name RBDSM, pleasure, spread love, hazard. I mean, there's all these acronyms for these safer sex talks, but mine, I feel, because it doesn't necessarily say like you're going to have pleasure, there is a hazard, or like this is a BDSM. I mean, it kind of is like it takes it outside of just sex.
Yeah.
And really, I would say it's the relationship conversation that nobody is having, but everybody should.
Yeah.
And so in this conversation is where I go into a little bit more and explore sexuality as part of whole person health. Because having these conversations allows us to create a safer container for ourselves and for each other, which is absolutely linked to how we could become healthier as mental health and physical health as well.
Conversations can be hard. Hey, it's Cardinal, your unconversational uncle. I've got a free tool to help you facilitate these hard conversations. Well, actually, I've got two. So there's the Relationship Anarchy smorgasbord on our website, link in the description. That facilitates creating a relationship agreement by communicating in no uncertain terms what you and your partner or partners are looking for. There's also Dr. Eveline's STAR resource, which she'll be talking about later in the episode. You can find that on her website, which is also linked in the description. Just want to stuff you full of worksheets. Do the work. It's actually kind of fun. Have you done any of these worksheets? Reach out and let us know how it went. Okay, back to the show.
Well, and hearing a doctor, I mean, I think about the things you're very well aware of being a doctor, that there is this power that is held within our society of like when a doctor says something, then this is to be true.
Mm-hmm.
And this is based in science and based in research and based in this wealth of knowledge. And I'm just thinking how powerful it is for you to be telling your patients this and talking about this, because you have such a wealth of knowledge from your schooling and the body, and then incorporating that into communication. Wow, like how our bodies are healthy affects our communication. What?
And a lot of also where, especially the last 2 years, I've come to realize how much of our health has to do with trauma and shame, right? I mean, shame is one of the most powerful tools to keep people in a cultural context box. You're supposed to be like this, right? You're supposed to get married and grow up and live happily ever after. Now, if you don't do that, there's some shame involved. So, I mean, I have to say, like, it's something I constantly battle as a physician, who
Yeah.
people say, "Oh, you're an MD, you're held above," like what you just said. But in the truth, it's like, I'm somebody who left my marriage at 22 years. I'm somebody who came out publicly as sex positive and all the things that that means, you know, and someone who came out publicly as non-monogamous
Yeah.
and someone who came out publicly as not heterosexual. And there was like that fear and shame around with that. And if I experience it, then how could you not experience it being queer? Correct? Like I identify as queer. How
Yeah.
could you not experience? But there's so much richness in that queerness. There's so much beauty and so much power that owning your queerness and owning all of this identities that you may or may not have allows you to actually be better aligned in the behaviors that you express and who you are, and be in a better place of integrity with yourself and others. The more you're in integrity, the healthier you're going to be.
I have to think too that, you know, the power that that has for all of the patients that you see, the way that you can embody that queerness, that's something I've experienced is I feel like I'm showing up so much more authentically for the clients I get to work with, and it gives them permission to do the same. And when you talk about shame, I hear so much shame around sex and sexuality. And I do hear clients who have felt shamed by physicians they've gone in. And so I'm so appreciative of your presence, you know, in the field, and also your own embodiment of being a queer person.
Yeah, I mean, tons. It's really interesting. Just last week, patients still have a hard time. I mean,
Yeah.
look me up. It's not hard to find who I am and what the work I do. And patients still have a hard time being honest with me. I had a
Yeah.
patient recently who is in a long-term relationship who they came in and were having some issues around their mouth. And I was like, oh, it's probably XYZ, and let's treat you for that. And while this is going on, I would avoid doing using your mouth for any sexual context,
Yeah.
like on genitals or something. And it was only, and then they call back and we're like, it's not getting better with that. And I'm like, okay, well, probably here's some other things, you could try. And then they actually told my medical assistant, they're like, well, I was making out with another person outside of my primary relationship. I
Uh,
was like, oh, okay, so what's going on is that there's really nothing going on in their mouth, but they're carrying this like guilt and shame in their mouth. And maybe we need to have them come in and do some swabs and because I think that if they were using their mouth with another person's mouth, they probably were also using it on their genitals, but didn't really want to say that. And
yeah.
then of course, when my medical assistant called back, they did say, well, I was doing more. But it's so interesting that that patient couldn't tell me this.
Uh,
And I think it does have to do with that fear of being shamed by this person in power, right? That, oh, this person in power has to be somebody who fits along the same, like, must be. I mean, sex negativity, especially in medicine, and really sex negativity in anything patriarchal, is so strong that it's hard, even though my patients know, it's still hard for them to bridge that gap. So thank you. I do work with teaching other healthcare providers on how to address that within themselves. Not that they always listen, but I try.
yeah. So when I'm hearing you say this, I'm curious, how has this changed your relationship dynamics? How has this been going from a cis heteronormative marriage that you're no longer in, and then you were saying through your 40s or starting in your 40s, really embodying this more non-monogamous queer way of being in the world, being more authentic to yourself?
Mm-hmm. So how has it changed my practice in medicine or my life in general?
I'm curious to hear if you want to share a little bit about your relationships and life in general, and you can incorporate things in your work too. But how did this change your life and your social life?
Well, one thing, it broadened my social life and it broadened my purpose in life. I realized that I saw this study once that said that as people who are estrogen driven go through their 40s and 50s and their estrogen starts to fall, that their sexual desire starts to fall as well. And it's stressful for them until they hit around 55. And at 55, they stop caring And it's like, that's when they get their happy place because they stop caring that their sexuality goes down. And I saw that and I'm like, oh my God, that's horrible. That's horrible. Like, I don't want to believe that. That's not true. I just want to say
Yeah.
to people,
Yeah.
that is not true. It does not have to be true. One thing that changing my model is recognizing that sexuality, number one, does not belong just with what I do with another person. It's actually my own. And
Yeah.
sexuality and sexual energy is something that I have to have a relationship within myself to keep it healthy.
Uh-huh.
And this then that there's so much, and then through all my exploration on sex positivity, that there's so much broader definition than penis and vagina or penis and anus or penis and something, right?
Yeah.
Like it's so much broader than that. So just that shift has really changed almost all of my relationships. My relationships with my platonic friendships where, touch and cuddle and just connection is deeper because I don't have that boundary of like, oh my God, we have to stay separated because I can't go that deep with you since it's negation of my monogamous emotional connection, right? I'm only supposed to have this emotional connection with one person. So it broadened, right? It broadened it into like I can develop and have whatever is present with any person. We don't have to be in a definition of you are my partner. What does partner mean? And then you take that outside of just the individual and you take it to the community level, right? And what does that mean in terms of community? How could I be in a relationship with community in a way that is deep and at the same time transpersonal so that we can affect this next layer of society?
Yeah.
So shifting out of the box that really kept me small in the individual and like I see it as layers. I don't know if you've ever heard the socioeconomic model that we exist in, like we first are the individual, then there's the family, then there's, family, home, community,
Yeah.
society, global. Like the only way to really make impactful changes is to broaden what our definition of love and touch and connection is. And
Yeah.
when sexuality belongs in here and is mine, it's not just in my head and it's not determined by what society tells me I can and cannot do, then I am expansive and I could like change the freaking world with it. So that's, I mean, in short, how has it changed my relationships? It's only made them better. I mean, I am still my ex-husband. Like, he's really like, I'm never going to have another one of those. The husband. So he's like the only one that I'll ever have. And we have a very good, close relationship.
Yes.
I felt like he was my soulmate, but I am incredibly grateful that we are not in the relationship we once were.
Yeah.
And we, our children see this really healthy relationship between the both of us, and we're still very much family. We get together. I mean, him and I will get together just alone, have dinner, hang out. We get together with our kids. So his partner is very supportive. My partners are supportive of that relationship. We've managed to bridge that. Like people are not used to that. But because
Yes.
like my love is not in a box, it's expansive. It goes to everything. I'm allowed to define things any way I want. I mean, Zelensky is queerifying the world by being this small man who was a comedian, right? But being the example of the new masculine in an integrated way. And I think that the next step for us really is breaking down those boxes because shame keeps us in those boxes, our trauma keeps us in those boxes, and that all keeps us in a place of scarcity. Oh my God, if I lose my husband, I'm going to have nothing.
Yes.
If
Yeah.
if I lose that marriage, I'm going to end up as an old lady living alone in a residential hotel with cats. I mean, those are the fears that we have that
Yeah.
keep us small versus like, if I leave this marriage and open myself up, I have community. I have relationships with people. Like one of the mottos in my life really is to fall in love with everybody.
Yeah.
So even when I walk in the room with my patients, I try to be in a place of love with them. And, if I was to meet either one of you in person over lunch, like that is my intention. Let's totally just fall in love. And it doesn't matter where it goes, or it doesn't have to go anywhere. But by doing this again, we're queerifying the world by recognizing that we live in a place of abundance and that sexuality doesn't just belong to what we do with other people. And I think that's very important. I mean, I know that this could be used against me someday if anybody ever if I ever make it bigger than my small world, that one of my missions is queerifying the world. It really is, because queerifying the world brings us to this transpersonal space that is expansive and is healing, and it's the integration of the masculine, feminine. It's the evolution of it into something greater that we don't even understand, and that's the only way that we're going to survive.
I'm glad you came back to the shame piece of it too, because that's what I see. Even the shame of, we quoted this before, but on Prentice Hempel's podcast, the shame of needing people, and taking it further, the shame of loving people. I really appreciate what you said about how you approach, connections. Like, I'm going to fall in love with you. That's very much how I am with my clients. And, I've always been a very person-centered therapist. And Keely, you and I even talked about this in season 1 with self-disclosure in therapy. That was literally shamed in education. It was shamed that we show up as an authentic person, yet that's where healing actually happens, right? In that connectedness. So yeah, thank you for bringing that in.
And we navigate that, even having a podcast. There was so many times. So I've been practicing therapy for 15 years. And I think back to when I started, the idea of even saying that I was queer, like fully out, saying that even recognizing that I'm a sexual being, like that, you were not supposed to be showing that to clients. You weren't supposed to be bringing yourself into the room, this like false idea of like, you need to be unbiased, just like how they used to say in journalism, bullshit, unbiased journalism. It's like, that doesn't exist. We bring in our shit, and we're actually doing more harm by not having ourselves in the room. And it's, the boundaries. And well, imagine that. Imagine if we actually had, well, maybe grad school is now, I doubt it. But if in grad school, we talked about boundaries in a way that was more authentic and created space for us to be human.
To show up full.
Yeah, I mean, in medicine, again, I think it's patriarchy. I think it's a patriarchal lens to try to be not involved, right?
Yeah.
Try to be a step above. And when all the institutions come from that patriarchal lens, it keeps us distant. And that's, I think, like, patriarchy served us and no longer serves us.
It's just not it is not serving men, women, non-binary folks.
No, it's not serving anybody. Not anymore. I mean, I think it served us. It got us to where we're at now, but I think it's outgrown.
Time for a change.
Yes, very much. Well, obviously, our planet is asking for that. The planet is now saying we can't support this anymore. Mm-hmm. So I do think that we have to own our queerness, but everything is queer. If we're not, it's like patriarchal, or is it queer? And
I like that. I'm going to go up and analyze everything. Is it patriarchal or is it queer?
Right? Because in a true queer sense, how could we not enter into anything we do without our lens? And a journalist, they're going to come in with their own lens and what they bring. And that's the beauty in it. That's why we could listen to different people and see different things. I have this metaphor that I like to use, and it's about reflections and how, we're all such broken. Like, I don't know anybody who doesn't feel broken at one time of their life. We all are like a bunch of broken pieces, right? And what happens when you take all those little broken pieces and you put them into a container? They get held, right? What happens when you put mirrors in that container?
Yeah.
The reflections. It becomes a kaleidoscope. It becomes this beautiful image, right? That's unique and constantly changing. And that's who we are. Like, that to me is like the hope, is that we could put all the our broken pieces in a container and have beautiful reflections about it and recognize the individual beauty that we are and how it's always going to shift. And that is like, that's so important, because everything that we look at comes from that container of whatever person you're seeing. I practice traditional medicine. I practice primary care. So my patients are everything. They're not just queer. In fact, I have very few queer patients. Most of my patients are, but they come to see me. So they must be getting something from that. They don't pretend to see anybody else.
Well, one of my favorite things to do as a therapist is actually to work with cis hetero couples and bring queerness into the room around couples therapy, especially with sex, is like opening up. Because when I'm working with folks who are over in their 40s, 50s, 60s and beyond, and the primary thought is, oh, I'm supposed to have sex with an erect penis. And well, sometimes a penis isn't erect and there's still all this pleasure that can be had. So that's one of my fun. Like, wait, what? That can happen? Wait, what?
We used to just expand their minds a little bit. I heard similarly someone, come in and say, well, sex shouldn't be that complicated. I just do this, this, and this, and that's how it goes. And it's like, and there's so much more,
So, Eveline, do you want to spend so one of the things we do is we wrap up the time with a queer joy. But before we get to queer joy, do you want to spend a couple more minutes or just expand a little bit for listeners around some of the workshops you do and specifically around the STARS concept and what you're doing out in the world?
Yeah. So STAR is a passion project I've had for about 5 years. And again, it's taken all the elements from sex positive communities and packaged it for hopefully everybody to recognize the things that they don't realize. It's a sex talk that nobody is having, but everybody should. And it's really a safer talk to create a safer container. And it stands for your sexual health, STI status, your turn-ons, your avoids, your relationship intentions and expectations, and your safety protocols. So starting with the first S, it's about understanding sexual health as whole person health. And it's not, people always come to me or they go to like sexuality clinics when they're having a problem. And the issue is that we only see sexuality as a function and we treat it as, so if it's not working well, then you have to make it work better. And we're not seeing it as an energetic that even if it's not working well, maybe it's working perfectly. Maybe it's just the next evolution of what your sexuality is supposed to be. So the first of it, I like to teach about sexual health in that context. And then STIs is also one of my passions because STIs, sexually transmitted infections, are the metaphor for sex negativity in our culture. It's the way that we are made to feel guilty for for having pleasure in our body. I mean, what a gift. I don't care if you believe in God or not, like we got a gift that we actually could enjoy being connected with another human and we could enjoy that even with ourselves. Like, damn. So STIs are used against us in that way. Like, oh, if you, and even the way that the CDC, like, be monogamous, limit your partners. Like, it's all sex negative. Everything is
Yeah.
like, oh my God, if I have, don't have multiple partners. I mean, they don't say what that even means. So everything is about don't have sex, or if you have sex, just do it with one person. Protect yourself. Use a condom, and they don't really talk about the depth of that. So
Yeah.
I do a lot of work around STIs. I do workshops on destigmatizing STIs, and I have a whole different model of how to reduce transmission and which is based on this communication pattern. So the first is the sexual health STI status. The second thing is turn-ons, and that's your desires. But it's more, people, again, like you said, oh, wait, sex is only with an erect penis. Sometimes your turn-ons could be just having a really good conversation.
Yeah.
That's one of my best turn-ons. I also shared with the patient the other day that, like, I really like eye gazing. Eye gazing for me is a real turn-on. And that patient was like, wow, mind blown. I never even thought of that. I'm going to go home and try it with my spouse. So, like, recognizing that it's not just like, I like my hair pulled. And yet that is also very important in having these conversations, because if somebody is really into kink and someone is not, it's better to find out before you get undressed and are in bed.
Yes. Yes.
This whole conversation, the whole stars conversation, is supposed to happen when you're in a platonic or pre-sexual space.
Yeah.
So that you could have like, it doesn't mean you have to go through absolutely everything, but there's some things that are good to know about somebody, like don't touch my nipples, or don't bite them, or bite them, just some basic things.
Yeah.
So that's your turn-ons. Your avoids are your boundaries, and also the place to discuss trauma and triggers, because that could be part of your boundaries. And it's amazing how many people don't understand what boundaries are. Boundaries are that space between our yes and our no. It's a space between me. It's a space where our yes and a no could exist, because it's that space between you and me to keep us healthy, which is different than a wall. A wall separates us. A boundary keeps us together. And so we need to know what our yeses or nos are. We need to learn how to communicate that, again, ideally before you enter into an intimate relationship. Relationship intentions is knowing who you are and what is it that you want. So it begins first with ourselves. Like, what is it that I want? What are my intentions in a relationship with anybody? And then what are specifically with somebody, what is it, my intention with you? What is it that I want with you? And if we have intimacy, what does that mean to me? And are you on the same page with that? The expectations is the aftercare, which, again, most people outside of sex positive spaces don't even consider.
Oh, I know. We need to do a whole episode on aftercare for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And not like kink aftercare. I'm talking
Yeah.
about just regular
Totally.
intimacy aftercare.
Yes.
I don't care if you just like making out. What is your aftercare needs? Like,
Yeah.
and those change. And in that aftercare, we also have to address people who come from like neurodiversity, because their aftercare may be different.
Uh-huh.
Intentions when you come from like a biracial couples. There's a lot of depth in each of these.
Yeah.
Safety is more than just STI and pregnancy
Yeah.
prevention. But that's what we often think is like condoms and
Oh, yeah.
barriers, like we think, but safety is actual emotional safety, physical safety, and spiritual safety. What do we need to feel in alignment with that? That is where, addressing all the intersectional pieces come into place. Addressing ableism, the power dynamics, socioeconomic changes, gender change, gender issues, racial issues, because all of those things, if we are not conscious of it, how can we create a safer container for you and me?
Yeah.
So that's it in a nutshell. It could be something super easy. It could really be an elevator speech. You can go through it. There's only 5 things. If you know them well and you know what you're doing, you could go through it in an elevator. But it's also really complicated, and it could take you. I mean, I have a document that's my stars document, and every time I complete a relationship or transition from something to another or learn something, I add it into my document of like, oh, this is now what I need. Like
Mhm.
one thing I just recently learned, like from the good and the bad, is that I need to know that my partners have done their work around their trauma.
Oh yeah, that's
Big one.
like a love language. Like, have you done your work, or are you actively doing it?
Doing it. Yeah, I mean, but like I've addressed it. Because
Yeah,
that is the one place that I realize. So this conversation requires vulnerability and integrity, right?
yeah. And and when you're saying this, I'm recognizing that it is an ongoing conversation because there's levels of how
Mhm.
much we want to be vulnerable with a person, depending on if
Mhm.
we're. And I could see it changing too, like whether it's a one night stand versus a fling versus a longer term, and
Right, right.
there's ways to negotiate that. I mean, I've seen it work out in all ways. It's malleable. We just have to be aware of, our own work.
Right. So, in a way, like calling it the stars talk makes it easy so people could come together and say, hey, let's do our stars talk.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like, oh, we have to do the elevator speech or we have to do pleasure or we have to do RBDSF or we have to do, it's like avoid whatever. It's like, it's so easy to just say, hey, let's do our stars talk. And what do they stand for again? We know one has to do with STIs, one has to do with like triggers and trauma, one has to do with what we want. It doesn't matter if you actually remember each piece
Yeah.
or if you hit each piece because it just knowing that that there is this conversation that we should all be having before we get intimate with people. And I hope to bring that out to the world. I hope to birth that to the world. And that's the book I'm writing. I'm writing it for young adults and people new to dating. I'm not writing it for sex positive communities because it's already discussed all of
Yeah.
this stuff. But it's like taking the sex positive concepts. And sex positive means that you recognize sexuality as a part of who you are as a human.
Hmm. What a wonderful wrap up for that. Thank you so much for sharing all this. Speaking of transitions, it's our moment to talk about queer joy. And Evelyn, it can be, when we say queer joy, it just means something joyful that happened the past week or so. And it's queer because we're fucking queer. So I feel like Melissa, though I've been saying this recently. I mean, I can start, or would you like to start, Melissa?
I'm happy to start.
Okay.
I've had a lot of joy recently, so maybe that's why you've been like dishing it to me first.
I know. And I'm excited to hear your queer joy.
Yeah, it was wonderful. So I celebrated the spring equinox yesterday. I know when listeners are hearing this, it's going to be a little bit after the fact. But with mask requirements changing, I know there's been a little bit more available in the community, and being new to the community I live in, I've lived here now over a year and I still feel like I'm not integrated. So I happened to go on a couple websites specifically for wellness centers and found at Awakenings Wellness Center in the southeast of Portland, there was a sound bath being offered. And so I went for an hour and a half last night in this amazing, and had I've never been to a sound bath before. I've done lots of meditation and interesting things, but this was really profound. And I don't know that I fully integrated my experience yet. My gut is telling me it's good. The remnants of that experience will be found throughout my whole week, this week. But really recommend that modality for anyone who's looking for a way to cleanse, a way to purge in this case, and kind of reset energetically, especially on a Sunday night before going into what I have a traditional sort of Monday through Friday work week. Exactly what I needed.
That's so wonderful. So, Evelyn, do you have a queer joy you'd like to share?
I'm really happy because I got all my taxes stuff together.
Yeah.
I got all of that, like all of the stuff that I've been putting off and I don't
Yeah.
like dealing with, like the real life stuff.
Yeah.
I got it all done this weekend. So that was my win.
Heck
Now
yeah.
now I can go back to doing the fun stuff.
Logistics are out of the way.
Right.
Yeah. Well, a week and a half avoiding real life. And I was at a conference and I don't even know what part to talk about for Queer Joy. Some of it is in my Instagram. People can see it. I got to meet people, like meet so many people and take pictures with them and just like fan over. Just, I will say one of the things that really stands out for me is Esther Perel talking about eroticism in a way of not about sex, but eroticism as the opposite of deadness. And how do we bring out eroticism in these ways of life, things like music and dance? And so I do think about eroticism a lot the past couple of weeks. But I, in going with the theme of this show, this season, and the dating and all these things, and I do want to share that I did have a little DC fling, and I will just call them DC because I've been trying to figure out what to name her, and we were joking about what to name her because I don't want to use her real name, but had this like wonderful fling that, in all honesty, had that feel of like, oh my gosh, like I can connect with people in a way that it doesn't have to feel forced. I can connect in just this really fun way. And she was my tour guide for a couple days. And I actually, for the first time in my life, extended my trip, like called the airline company. I was like, I'm going to stay a couple extra days. I'm just going to explore and I'm just going to be in this and see what happens. And I would not have been able to experience this if I was in a monogamous relationship right now. And that's what's so fascinating. And I don't have to label myself, and this is who the hell knows what kind of relationship I'm going to be in moving forward, but I don't need to figure that out. It was just so much fun. It was so fucking gay. And I will say that, I call it a fling, but we did spend Sunday thinking about where we could meet up in the country in between. So super queer.
Do queer flings never end?
So to be continued, but thank you again, Eveline, for sharing your knowledge. And just, it was so fun to listen to your story and for listeners to get to hear about you. And I can't wait for them to check out all of your offerings. And can you let people know real quick how to find you? What's your best?
So I am on Instagram and soon to be on TikTok as at sexmeddoc, SEXMEDDOC.
Yeah.
You could also find my work on Stars at Make Time for the Talk. And that is also on Instagram and soon to be TikTok, as well as the website. It's Make Time for the Talk. You could sign up. I will be soon having some workshops, some free events, as well as a 6-week kind of coaching so people could figure out their own stars, learn it. Yeah. And we'll be having probably a facilitator training for that as well in the fall.
Oh, so wonderful. Well, thank you again for joining. Thank you for all the listeners listening to us today, and have a queer and joyful week.
Thanks for listening to Queer Relationships, Queer Joy, a podcast by the Connective Therapy Collective. Hosted by Keely C. Helmick and Melissa DeSegurant, with audio edited and produced by me, Cardinal Marking. Intro music is by Bad Snacks. This week's guest was Dr. Eveline Dacker. Find Eveline at sexmeddoc on Instagram or at maketimeforthetalk.com. Links in the description. If this episode made you smile or think, tell us about it. If you hated it, tell us about that. Review us on iTunes or Spotify, or send us an email at info@connectivetherapycollective.com. For more queer joy, visit our website at connectivetherapycollective.com. Love ya. Bye.